Hello, everyone. My name is Gillian White. I'm an editor at The Atlantic. I am thrilled to be here with all of you, and I'm thrilled to be here with our panel. The topic that we're going to be talking about right now is identity in the workplace. And what we mean by that is, I'm sure lots of people have heard, it's a bit of a contentious issue right now. Current federal civil rights legislation protects workers from discrimination in the workplace based on things like race, color, nation of origin, things like that. But there's not explicit language that carves out protections for people based on sexual orientation or gender identity. So that's what we want to talk about right now. On our panel, we have some experts. We have David Boaz of the Cato Institute. He's a libertarian and author of The Libertarian Mind. And we also have Hi Feldblum of the EEOC. And we want to jump right in. And Hi, I want to talk to you. I want to get a bit of nuance about what the existing legislation is when it comes to protections for workers based on identity and sexual orientation. What myths are out there about the law and the ability for recourse if you feel that you have been unfairly discriminated against?
Sure. So the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, of which I'm one of the 5 commissioners, was established in 1964 as part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act that prohibits discrimination based on sex. And early on, after it was enacted, there were gay people and transgender people who came to the EEOC, where you have to come first to file a charge before you can go to court, saying we were discriminated against based on sex. It seemed pretty logical. And they were blown away by both our agency saying no and by the courts. Mm-hmm. But things have changed. And our commission has ruled that we believe sex discrimination covers discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So when you hear that in 29 states there's no recourse if you've been discriminated at work, or if you hear you can get married in the morning and fired in the afternoon and there's nothing you can do if you're in one of those states, that's a myth in terms of current law. Because you can come to the EEOC and file a charge and we'll investigate. And we've gotten, over the last 2 years, 2,300 charges. So these are people who haven't heard there is no legal recourse, and they've come to us. And we've helped over 200 people. Now, this is not to say that we don't need this explicit protection. We do, because that's the only way to guarantee the protection, and that's the only way to get the word out once that law is passed. But let's be a little bit more nuanced about what protection exists right now.
Right. David, I want to come to you. You have been a vocal supporter of same-sex marriage early on. What is the libertarian take on workplace protections, if they should exist, and what type of recourse people should have if they feel that they've been fired because of their identity or their sexual orientation?
Well, you're right. Libertarians have been involved in gay rights efforts for many years, many decades, when they involved removing legal impediments to individuals pursuing happiness. And so the sodomy law leading up to the Lawrence decision, the marriage equality effort leading up to the Obergefell decision, libertarians were involved in all of that. Where we do often part company with other gay rights advocates is the idea of increasing coercion of government in private lives, in businesses, in employment, in all of those areas. So what I would say there is that we got a lot of politicians and political activists on the program today, but gay liberation didn't happen through politicians and even through laws. It happened through people coming out and consciousness raising, and that's what has changed the world to the extent that we can have marriage equality and discuss these workplace protections, and it will continue doing so. There's a big difference between the government, which is an agent of coercion, and the whole rest of society, which is not allowed to use force and coercion against people. We have 7 million businesses in this country. We can look for jobs, look for suppliers, customers in a lot of different businesses. There's only one federal government, and in your state, there's only one state government. That means the rules for how the government can treat you ought to be different from how we can treat each other, even if we treat each other in ways that we don't like.
Right. So to follow up on that a little bit, so if I'm a small business owner, I have no religious affiliation or anything that might exempt me in that capacity, how far should I be able to go in terms of deciding who I employ and who I say, no, I don't want you, not because you aren't an efficient or productive worker, but because I do not agree with the lifestyle you live or how you identify yourself. Should there be limits on that?
You know, when I lived in San Francisco some years ago, I used to see rental ads that said, secure all-gay building. Well, some people want to live in an all-gay building, I guess. Well, that's okay with me. If that's what they want, the landlord wants to supply it, that's fine with me. I don't think those ads exist anymore. I think they must have run afoul of non-discrimination law. So whether that's a gain or a loss for gay people when they can't get that information, I'm not sure. But yeah, I think we have millions of small businesses, and I would like to leave the heavy hand of government out of their relationships with their customers and their employees as much as possible.
Okay. Hi, I want to come back to you, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the suits that have been filed. What type of discrimination do you guys see most often? What type of complaints do you get most often?
Well, as I said, we've gotten 2,300 complaints so far on sexual orientation or gender identity, and they track the type of issues we see in sex discrimination and race discrimination. Significant number of cases of harassment, significant number of cases where after someone complained about harassment, they were retaliated against, and then cases where they were not hired by some business operating in the private marketplace. Said, we don't want to hire you because you're gay, or found out they were gay. And identity in the workplace. It is true that now that we can get married and we can have the picture of our spouse, same-sex spouse on our desk, for someone who wants to fire us, now they might. And again, right now they do it in many places with impunity because the employer doesn't think there's any federal law that prohibits that. I mean, one of the things that I think is a plus now with the two-track system, as I call it, one track trying to get an explicit law protecting us based on sexual orientation or gender identity, and using the existing law, is we don't need the politicians to pass a new law to do that second track. Use the current, but we see the entire range.
Do you think there's more that the EEOC could be doing?
Well, I think we're doing everything we can with the resources that the Congress has given us. We enforce all employment discrimination laws, so in all the bases. We have made the issue of LGBT protection under Title VII one of our strategic enforcement priorities. But we also have enforcement priorities on immigrant workers and pay equity. So I think we're doing pretty much what we can. I think we need education out there so people know they can come to us. And I think we need, and I think Barney Frank made this so clear, the politicians do what the people communicate to them. And it doesn't cost a lot of money to pick up the phone to your local member of Congress, and I think for the first track approach of getting a new law, that's what people need to be doing.
Right. So I think one of the interesting things is that you guys are not, on vastly different sides here, but when it comes to the need for a federal law on this, you guys are. Is there a...
No, we're completely not on the same plate, right? You
yeah,
think there should be...
Exactly.
Oh, okay, we're not on the same I'm sorry.
Which exactly goes to... Which exactly goes to my next question. Is there a middle ground?
Laws involve using force against people, and so Kai is right that libertarians are generally against laws that are going to interpose the force of government into private relationships. So is there a middle ground? Well, sure, we have all kinds of middle ground. We're having middle ground right now. For one thing, we're seeing major businesses, most major businesses now not only having non-discrimination policies, but enthusiastically participating in underwriting conferences like this and gay pride parades and all of that. And I think there's something unpleasant about, we just won a huge victory with marriage equality, inconceivable 20 years ago. Inconceivable with when the president of the Cato Institute was the first think tanker to endorse it on national television. But no one else thought it could happen then. I worry that following that up by looking for a pizzeria in a small town in Indiana or a 70-year-old florist outside Seattle and finding somebody who doesn't want to serve gay people and bringing the force of government down on them is going to possibly create that political backlash that we heard about earlier. And second is an unfortunate example of winners driving everything before them. We've won huge victories, and mostly through the coming out and consciousness-raising process, but also the courts. And I think that we have achieved so much more than we thought we would. I don't want to chase down every florist and pizzeria.
Okay. Hi.
So I actually want to say that I think there is a lot of common ground prior to the legislation question that we do share. And I want to give kudos to Cato for actually being there at the Lawrence v. Texas, putting in briefs. I think in terms of getting to that middle, folks, saying, really, why should the government be intruding to say gay people can't get married? Why should government be intruding to say that certain sexual activities should be criminalized? So that, I think, is absolutely common ground. And I think the other common ground is the education, Where I think we part ways, and I don't think there's a common ground, it's really an on switch or an off switch, is whether when someone has not been educated and wants to keep discriminating, there is only one federal government. There is only one state government, local government that can say, we will not tolerate this in our society. That's it. I hope it's a small slice of people who experience that discrimination, but if and when they do, we need a law that's there. And don't make it the pizzeria, this. If you have an allowance of a religious exemption for private businesses, which does not exist right now, that is a huge loophole. We at the EEOC brought two cases, our first two cases, challenging discrimination against a transgender person. One of the employers settled with us within the year. The other employer is fighting us. And that employer could say, well, actually, we're religiously based. It's a funeral home. But maybe the business that owns it has... We do not want to allow that, and the only thing that can protect us is a law that doesn't have that exemption, either by the legislature putting it in or court reading it in.
I think it is an illiberal attitude to say to a person with strong religious views, you have to participate in a ceremony like a gay wedding that offends your religious sensibilities. Go to a different wedding planner. Go to a different florist. I just don't think it's that big a deal. We're not talking about the only doctor in town. We're talking about businesses, and there are millions of businesses, and almost all of them want our business.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that is a great place for our panel to stop, mostly because we want to hear from you guys. If you guys have questions, I would love for you to stand up. There's someone coming around with the mic. Please do introduce yourself before your question, and try and keep it concise.
You should stand, maybe someone will see you. Oh, no, sorry. Sorry.
We're going to go back there.
All right. Rodney McCoy. I work with Nova Salute, HIV prevention organization in Northern Virginia. Mr. Boaz, while I respect what you say, as an African American, we needed the Civil Rights Act to make sure that none of us, because of the color of our skin, would not experience that type of discrimination anywhere. Add to that, as ordained clergy, what I believe is what I believe. I have no right to deny you a basic service because your belief or how you live is different from who I am and what I do. So therefore, with respect to where you stand as a libertarian, I do feel that it is on the wrong side of where we are now in history. And I would ask anyone in the audience to really rethink any opposition to any kind of legislation that would protect people's basic human rights. Thank you.
We had a question right there, and then also
Hi, Luis Medina. I work with the federal government, but this position is not from the federal government. I have to say that to any lawyers who might catch me. There is in the federal acquisition regulation, there is a provision that was recently enacted that prevents any contractor, any private company that is doing business with the federal government from discriminating. I just wanted to add that and let everyone know that that exists.
Yep.
Sorry, sir.
And 25% of the American workforce works for business that does contracting with the federal government. So it is a huge amount, and it shows the importance of the dual-track strategy, because those contractors were always prohibited from discriminating based on sex. The Department of Labor adopted our position, the EEOC's position on transgender people being covered, but a lot of contractors didn't know that. So putting it as an explicit prohibition is very helpful. And then, keep going on this general sex discrimination that applies to every employer with 15 or more employees.
Right. We want to make sure we get to your question.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have a question for Hai. The federal agencies all report out some demographic data for race and ethnicity and disability status, and we've been talking a lot today about the importance of data and understanding workplace issues. So I'm curious what the EEOC might think about an effort to allow federal employees and applicants to voluntarily self-disclose LGBT demographic data so that we actually have a baseline to start doing some better assessment.
That is a great question. I'm a huge fan of the Williams Institute, whom you heard from. There's a lot of power in data. I think that will take time. I think that people still think that it's some invasion of privacy to ask you about your LGBT status when it's not about, what your race or sex is. We understand the utility of that data. It took a while to get disability data in there, and one of the things I fought for just recently to get disability data in the applicant flow data for the federal government, which didn't exist. So I will say I think that's an important issue. One of the things I've discovered by joining the federal government after 20 years as a law professor is things take a hell of a lot more time than I would think it would need. But
we can take one more question if it is the fastest and most concise question you have ever asked.
Hi, thank you very much. I will speak for the federal government. I work within the Office of Management and Budget, which is a federal agency within the Executive Office of the President. And I would just like to say about all this data, especially in the first panel, we also heard about the importance of data. I help co-chair an interagency working group called Measuring Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. And I would like to say that with the federal government's backing, the White House and the President of the United States, it is of utmost importance that we do gather this data. And so to speak to your term, we are working very hard. We have convened a group. It's got 80 members within the federal government. We are working very hard, and I'm, side note, very proud of this president and this administration that it is important so that we can get this data that shows there is discrimination. We can use it in litigation. We can use it to look at health disparities, everything. So basically what I'm trying to say is good on Obama, and we are working very hard to get this done.
Thank you all. Thank you to my panelists.